Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen. Hello, Andrea.
Hello, Alison. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I'm good. Good morning to you from afternoon
Good
here.
afternoon.
It's
How's
beautiful
your-
sun. Yeah, beautiful sun before you ask. It's been a gorgeous day. Really, really cold this morning. But then once the sun came up, it's like summer. I ate lunch outside.
serious?
Really, really wonderful. How about you?
Wow. It's been snowing for 2 days.
Oh, you've still got snow. Wow.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have snow for a while, but we have it again now. So
You got it back
it's
now.
okay. It's not
Okay.
loads and loads, but I'm just sitting here watching it fall out the window in front of me.
Pretty.
It's gorgeous. So I'll probably go outside and take some pictures whenever I do the chores.
Lovely. So I get to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And welcome to everyone who's listening, whether you've got snow or sun today. Thank you for sending us your feedback about the episodes, letting us know that you're enjoying it. Remember
So
that
helpful.
anything you can do to spread the word about the podcast is very much appreciated by both of us. So if there's an episode that you like, or you like this one perhaps, do share it with someone who you think would be helped
Yes.
or who it would inspire, because
Yes,
the more
please.
people that know about this beautiful way of eating, the better the world will be, in my opinion.
And the more connected we are and the more we're all learning from each other, it's
Yeah.
all a good thing. Yeah. Send this episode to somebody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
So, have you had breakfast yet, Andrea?
I did. It's been a
What did you
good,
have?
busy morning so far. And it's only 7 a.m. I had two slices. Well, it's like maybe the equivalent of one normal bread slice because it's a small loaf, but two slices of kind of stale bread. And you know, Alison, what is my favorite thing to do with stale bread?
Oh, fry it. Fry it in lard.
Yes. Yep, exactly. I toasted it on the stove, but I think it sounds nicer the way you said it. I fried it and just in a little bit of butter.
Butter.
And then I salted it just a little bit. So it's almost like you have a little cracker in a way. And then I have some egg salad. So I cooked 3 18 packs of eggs. So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4.5 dozen eggs in the Instant Pot a couple days ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a nice way to hard boil them because they all hard boil to the same, specification, and
Yeah,
the shells come
okay.
off pretty easy.
Are
And
they all from your hens then? All from your chickens?
yes.
Wow.
Do you know,
laying.
Alison, I've been keeping track. Do you know how many dozen eggs we've gotten so far this month? It's February as we're recording, and today's, I think, the 23rd. So far,
Yeah.
we've gotten 60 dozen eggs.
Gosh.
So
they
no
are
shortage
busy.
of eggs over here. Yes, they are.
Yeah.
And lots of new small hens that are laying for the first time. So
Okay.
this is a very fruitful year. So last year's hens are now in their second year, which is peak production for a hen. And then the hens that were pullets over the winter are now laying for the first time. So they'll
I
be
see.
at a high number for spring. So anyway, somebody asked, can you Instant Pot the eggs without putting a rack in the bottom? Yes, I suppose you can, because I used a rack in the bottom of my Instant Pot the first time I cooked eggs, and I've never done it since. So I've been doing it this way for maybe 5 years. And somebody else asked, how fresh can I cook the eggs? So if you hard boil fresh eggs, they will not peel. And people say to me all the time, yeah, but I buy eggs straight from the store and I hard boil them the same day and it's fine. To which I just give them a very pointed look until they realize what they just said. And I would say I've been toying around to see how fresh of eggs. I would say roughly a week seems to be ideal.
Okay.
Any sooner than that, and some will peel fine and some struggle. But a week or more, and you can keep fresh eggs in a cool spot for 2 or 3 months. So,
Do you put them in special, like the egg boxes or egg-shaped boxes? Because otherwise they'd just break, or I'm trying to imagine how you store that many eggs.
Yeah. So we have a fridge in the garage that is not on right now, and I've just
I
been
see.
stacking them in there. So it's cold, really cold out there. So I
Yeah.
date them and stack them according to date, and then I pull from the oldest ones first.
Okay, so you cooked
And
a lot of
yep,
them in the Instapot.
yeah. So we just made a big old batch that would last for a week or so, and then I also made a batch of mayo, and I got some questions about that too because I posted pictures of it. So mayonnaise is where, Allison, how, like, have you ever bought mayonnaise at the store?
Oh, many, like 2 decades ago, probably.
So if you're gonna buy mayo, it's pretty expensive, I think. Especially if you're getting good mayo. Like around here, I would say a pint is $10 or $12 for a good quality. And a pint doesn't last very long. Like if you're making potato salad, you would use the whole thing. That's an expensive potato salad. So if you're making it at home, fat can also be a pretty expensive commodity to buy. I know avocado oil is a popular one for making mayo. But I use all the little scrappy fats that I have left. So drippings off of beef or the top off of like chicken broth, schmaltz, I think you said that was called.
Yeah.
Or like I have a couple pints of fat that when I made head cheese last year, then, there's a ton of fat on the top of that. And I skimmed it all off and it made several pint jars. So I used that. So it was like head cheese mayo.
And
You
was
know what I
the
mean?
fat that you used from the freezer, or had you kept it in the fridge
Yeah.
all that time?
No, it was in the freezer. Excuse me.
Okay.
It was in the freezer and sorry, I melted it on the stove. So when I make
Sounds delicious.
mayo, I just try to melt it at a really low temp and I get it barely melted. And then I turn the heat off. Or no, wait, I prefer to say I kill the heat, as Aaron says.
Okay.
So I kill the heat and then I mix in more
It's very
fat
dynamic of you.
and then I just stir it until it all melts. And that's kind of my way of keeping it cool.
Yeah.
And then I'm always in a rush. So I then immediately make it into mayo.
So are you using half liquid fat and half that fat, or are you using all that fat?
Depends on what I have. This batch I used all fat and didn't use any liquid fat.
Okay, that works like that. Because when I a couple of weeks ago I made mayo for one of the Ancestral Kitchen challenge prompts. And
which one?
Posted it on Instagram. Well, it was the one use fat in a new way, because I literally hadn't made mayo for years. Mainly because we've been focused not on using eggs, because Gabriel's has an intolerance to them. But I missed mayo so much. And I'd never made it with lard before. Previous times when I've made it, I'd always used liquid at room temperature oil. So olive oil, but that's kind of too strong on its own. In the past, I'd used avocado oil, but we can't get that locally. And I just don't want to do that anymore, So olive oil everywhere here. And lard that we home render is really, from pigs that are just around the corner. So I used half lard, half olive oil from the prompt, use fat in a new way, because it was a new way for me. And using the mortar and pestle, I made mayo, and it was delicious. But I haven't done one that's 100%, solid at room temperature fat melted. I might try that next. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it does get thicker in the fridge. More like scoop off a piece and spread it. But
yeah.
I would also say if somebody's intimidated by making mayo, Aaron does have a cooking class they can take. And he told me that mayonnaise is in that class. But also use a fat that's solid at room temp, because even if you break your mayo, it doesn't matter. It'll actually still be pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, someone actually asked me that. Does it not go solid in the fridge? But because our lard is quite spreadable, and it was only 50% lard,
Well, yeah,
stayed liquid.
my pork fat, when I take it out of the fridge, is pretty thick. Like I can scoop it with a spoon and it'll stand up in it, right? But then when you mix it with the eggs, even if you don't think about it in terms of mayo, as emulsified, even if you just think about it in terms of, that much water weight being mixed with the fat, it becomes a very nice consistency. It's beautiful and delicious. And it's a good way to use up scraps.
You put in the fat and the eggs. Do you put whole eggs or just yolks?
I do the whole egg.
Whole egg, okay. And then what else did you add?
Salt. That's it.
Salt. Okay, so no vinegar, no lemon juice, none of that.
Sometimes I do.
No mustard.
I mean, it just depends on my mood, I guess.
What you've got around, yeah. Okay, so then you mix that in with your eggs and made a kind of a and hard-boiled egg
salad
spread.
Yeah,
nice.
And I threw in some pickles that we canned in the summer, and made a egg salad. So I made that a couple days ago, and I just have a, bathtub of that in the fridge.
You have a fridge which is just for egg salad.
Yeah, that's coming up. So then I just put some of that on my nice warm toasted salty fried bread and ate it with a fork. It was really good. I thought it would be weird to have cold egg salad for breakfast, in my head that sounded weird, but it was really good.
I think once you get used to that kind of thing. I remember when I was very much younger, someone made me some tuna for breakfast, and I was like, what? Tuna breakfast? This guy's like crazy. But now I eat anything for breakfast, really. Stock, fat, whatever.
I guess in my head, breakfast is hot,
Ah, okay, I see.
Like warm. Maybe because it's cold and it's early. Anyway, what did you have for lunch? I'm assuming you had lunch.
Yeah, I did. I have to think about this. I had I made some kind of a one pot in the cast iron dish with beef mince from our farmer. Nice. So I started off with melting lardo in the bottom. I chopped up some of our lardo that we home cured and put it in the bottom of the cast iron pan and let it melt and give off its fat. And then
is this
I put
the herbed one?
Yeah, this is the herbed one. Yeah, with rosemary and juniper berries and salt and various other things. It turned out really well. Interesting, I've got another recipe for a different type of lardo from the north of Italy, which I'm getting some lard I'm getting some fat on Saturday, and I'm going to try this method, which is preserving it under water in a brine. So I'm quite excited about doing that Saturday. Anyway, this was the old lardo, which I did like you would bacon. I covered it in the cure. And so I fried that up, and then I put in a chopped red onion and cumin seeds and coriander. Quite a lot of coriander. I was in a coriander mood.
Of course.
And then I broke up the beef mince, and put it in. Cooked
Is
that.
Beef mince what we call ground beef over here?
Yeah, ground beef, yeah.
I think I like beef mince better.
Beef mince, nicer. Yeah, beef mince. I put that in and made sure it was browned kind of through. And then I just looked in the vegetable drawer in the fridge and saw what was left. And it's kind of cabbage season over here. I kind of don't think of all of those green vegetables as cabbages, because in English they have different names. They have cauliflower, which comes from the French, and there's cavolo nero, kale, which we would call kale, and then there's obviously cabbage, but they all have different names. Whereas in Italian, they're all cavolo, all of them. The cavolo nero, the little cavolo, the Brussels sprouts are cavallini, little cabbages. So everything is called cabbage. So there was a green cabbage, a bit of Savoy cabbage, and then I had some leaves from a cauliflower. I don't like to throw away the leaves because they're good. So chop them up really small, put them all in with the mince and the onions, a bit of garlic, and stirred it round, put a lid on the cast iron pan and just had it cooking there slowly for about 45 minutes. Wow. So then the cabbage goes already soft, the flavours of the cumin and the coriander and the lard kind of carries those flavours through the mince. It's really nice. We had that. And then I have an incredible amount of rye bread in the house at the moment because I am working on a rye sourdough bread course for the fermentation school. Yes. And I am testing recipes. So I have made... my freezer is full of rye bread because I make one and then I cut it in half and we eat half, and then I put the other half in the freezer because we haven't got time to eat it before I make another one.
It's so hard, Alison.
I know. There's just rye bread everywhere. So we had some rye bread with lard spread on the top. And then we had a new beer, which I've been quite excited about making for a while, which is instead of using rye, I used spelt. It took me a while to get back to spelt beer because I couldn't find any spelt that sprouted, but I got hold of some. And we made the malt with the spelt. And then I had been reading about heather, the plant heather, which is called erica in Italian, and how that has historically been used in meads and in England in beers. So I thought, well,
that makes sense. Isn't it everywhere there?
Exactly, it's everywhere.
Like a weed? Yeah.
So I went to the herboristeria here, the herbal shop, and I bought some erica, and I put it in the beer. I had no idea what I'm doing. I said to Rob, should I put a cup in? It looks a bit too much. Okay, let's just do half a cup. So I put half a cup in. And it's given the spelt beer a really beautiful kind of floral flavour. And the fact that it's spelt beer, I prefer it to rye beer. Just really lovely. Really? And it's carbonated beautifully. So we had, the mince and the bread with the lard on and some beer, a little glass of beer on the side.
What does heather taste like?
That's a really good question. And it's got a bitter edge to it. So you don't taste the bitter at the beginning. You taste the bitter kind of towards the end. But it's got a sweet kind of light honey flavour. The honey's the only word I could use, really. I mean, they make heather honey. It's quite a popular thing. It's sweet and floral, but then it's got a bitter tang at the end. It's lovely.
I wonder if it grows out here. I feel like our climate is similar enough that if it came out here and it's not native, it would probably be pretty invasive, but I have no idea.
It grows in Italy as well, because this heather came from Italy. It was dried from the herbalist, but it's Italian heather. So I think it should grow where you are.
Maybe it's one of those things like Stephanie said, there's versions of it all over, Yeah.
I'd like to do it with
sounds delicious.
Fresh heather, but it was lovely. Yeah, really, really nice.
Is beer like grain broth?
Yeah, it is. Well, it's grain broth, but it's probiotic grain broth, isn't it? Because there's a beautiful transformation going on in the process that is eating those sugars and changing it into bubbles and all the kind of side things that come from it.
Can you imagine how boring this podcast would be if we were into fasting all the time? Like, what did you eat? I didn't have anything.
I had water.
Again. And then I smelled lavender.
Yeah. No, our breakfast section wouldn't be as varied, would it? Would be over. We'd have more time to talk about other things.
How long did you fast for?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about food again.
Yeah, okay, why not? That's a good idea. Yeah, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today, which we haven't actually, neither of us had any to eat, which is unusual.
I was actually surprised when I looked at my own breakfast. I thought, this is like the one time I don't actually have it in my breakfast.
Yeah, so we are going to talk about stock today. And in our preparations for the episode, Nourishing Traditions, the cookbook by Sally Fallon Morel came in, and there's a million stocks in there, like stocks I'd never imagined even existed. I'm like, why am I not making these stocks? But as with that book, there are so many footnotes and quotes and things from medical books and also things from fiction that are used in the sides, in the margins. And I thought I'd start by reading one of them that struck me when I was looking through the stock chapter to get us going. So you ready?
I am always ready.
Yeah. So this is by John Thorne. It's from a publication called The Outlaw Cook. And he says, American cooking, tumbling as fast as it is towards a totally take-out cuisine, retains two potent images that can still revivify our appetite for good homemade food. Baked goods, which stand for the gift of pleasure, and meat-based broths, from which all the kitchen's healing goodness flows.
Wow. Not
too long ago, this image reflected a truth, a continuous river of broth spilled from the stock pot to inspirit soups, enhance pasta and rice, baste the roast, sauce the vegetables, and provide a sop for the bread. And, most important of all, its aroma filled the house, cosseting all who inhaled it with deep well-being, as if the very air were filled with nurture. The chef may have transmogrified his meat waters into gold. The housewife transmuted them into a far more essential nutrient, love.
Oh, I
think that's
love
lovely.
that.
And I found it interesting that he talks about the smell, because I like the smell of stock, but I know a lot of people don't. And some people try to make their stock in a way that it doesn't smell the house out. But I like the smell of stock in our house, just like I like the smell of lard cooking.
I was thinking the other day when I cook stock overnight and, wake up and there's like condensation on the windows because it's cold outside. And I thought to myself, hey, it's like a humidifier. It's like a chicken humidifier, kind of some bonus benefits in the air. And it feels so good when you've been outside and it's cold and you walk in and just this wall of meat stock aroma hits you as you go in the door. It smells so good. In Sally Fallon's book that I have at my side, Nourishing Broth, she also, as you know, pulls from literature. And it is funny. Alison, can you think of how many times you have heard somebody mention broth in literature? Like it's all over the place.
Yeah.
So she says in here, in his satire, The Frogs, playwright Aristophanes had Dionysus asked Heracles if he'd ever felt a sudden urge for soup. And our hero replied, soup? 10,000 times so far. So we got an advertisement for broth all the way back.
Wow, incredible. And that's what's so essential about broth, that it's been used for centuries and centuries and centuries by so many traditions. You go, I remember listening to a podcast recently by Judy Smith, and she was interviewing a lady who'd written a book on Galilean food, the tradition of a long time ago, and how the broth was very much part of that. So many traditions have the same ritual, have the same way of using broth. And I think it's astounding that it's something that just literally touches so many cultures and so many parts of the world.
And it is born out of the easiest way to cook something, which is to have a container over a fire. Here in the house, we have these built-in redundancies for power and energy and heat and cooking and things like that. And the most basic of them all is that we can put a kettle on top of the wood stove downstairs and, and shove sticks in the stove. Like you don't need a turning spit or an oven, and baking ovens weren't even very common in the average household, even until the last 100 years. So,
definitely. I think that's one of the reasons why it's been so historic and it's been so popular, because it's so easy to cook.
You can put a squirrel in a pot, and everybody can get some. Whereas if you're trying to part out the squirrel, there's not much to go around.
Yeah, definitely. It's
I recommend that.
I was talking to someone about cooking squirrel yesterday, actually, weirdly.
Oh dear.
I think that, it's, when I think about, why is stock so popular? Well, I know why I like it, because it brings so much flavour to all of the other things that I make in the kitchen. Whether it's something as simple just as, I'm boiling up some millet or some rice, and if I put stock in it rather than just water, it's going to taste so much better. Right through to the other end, where chefs will reduce it into a kind of a jus, and then use it as a very sparing sauce for a 5-star dish. It's so, it just carries flavour incredibly in such depths. So I think that's the reason I like it. But obviously I like it as well because I get bones for next to nothing, and I'm cooking up something that's incredibly nutrient dense for nothing. And also I love the fact that those bones, well, what's going to happen to them? Just really going to get thrown away if I don't use them. So it's zero waste if you eat a whole pig and you use all the bones for stock, you're literally not going to have any waste. It's so economical from the perspective of these days. You know, when people ask, well, what can I do to start with an ancestral diet on a budget? I don't have much money. Bones cost next to nothing.
Yep.
And they were a beautiful thing and a nutrient dense
Especially
thing.
if you can find somebody who butchers. If you have friends who go deer hunting, I think nobody ever saves the bones. I'm like, what? Like, save those bones. So ask them, can you save me the bones?
Yeah, definitely. I think that, you know, building relationships like that, you can find bones for either 3 or next to nothing.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's a wonderful food, and it plays out on how important it's been through all of the cultures, you know, through time, for sure. I wondered if we could focus a bit on the health benefits. And I think maybe you know more than me. I mean, I know that it's full of minerals and they're in a form that is really easy for our body to use. I know that it includes gelatin, which is, you know, super healing for us. And I know that its proteins don't have a lot of the toxic problems that other proteins do. And I know it's got glycine in it, which is anti-inflammatory and helps you produce your gastric secretions to help you digest, helps with your liver. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I bet that Sally Fallon book on nourishing broths just has tons of information on the health benefits of stock. Yeah,
after chapter. Yes, there's so much packed in here that I'm not even going to try to bring it all on here. But something that everybody is talking about now is collagen supplements, hydrolyzed collagen, gelatin powders, you know. And part of why we're buying these powders and working so hard to bring them into our homes is because the massive proportion of broth-based foods that would be the normal part of a diet of a omnivore like us is gone. And so people think of, like, when somebody says, oh, what do you do with a gallon of broth? How in the world are you going to use a gallon of broth? I'm just thinking, like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? How will I use it? Because if everybody in the house is drinking a pint, and if you make soup, like you said, you make rice or you cook noodles, our dogs usually get a quart in their bowl in the evening, each of them. And sometimes I'll pour out a bowl for the cats too. And that's not even doing anything fun. That's just the basics. You've already torn through a gallon there. And now let's talk about, you know, boiling it down to make cubes or making, you know, cocoa out of it or something like that. Like, there's just so much you can do. Collagen, of course, is necessary for anti-aging, right? Like, we see collagen break down in our body when our skin kind of sags and gets less elastic, and our ligaments and our bones also, and our cartilage, you know, all that popping and snapping and everything. Snap, crackle, pop. And we have all heard of the popular supplements. Everybody says you should take glucosamine and chondroitin. And those are 2 of the ingredients you need in your body to produce collagen. That's why they're so important to take. But if you are actually drinking bone broth, you're getting a broader spectrum than just 2 of the components you need. There are 29 or more, there could be more, distinct types of collagen in animal tissues. So when you have, like you said, Sally Fallon has a broad range of broths in her book. You know, there's just from the basic animals, you can have fish broth, chicken broth, beef broth, pork broth, right? And just getting that variety in will, you know, increase your range of collagens you're getting. There's different types of collagen. Like I said, the 5 most common ones, types 1 through 5, all do different things. There's type 3 collagen that builds up the walls of your arteries and your organs. And there's type 4 that ensures the health of cell basement membranes. This is all in Sally's book, Nourishing Broth, which is just as glorious as Nourishing Traditions, except it's just about broth. There's type 5, which is used to build a healthy placenta during pregnancy. And, you know, like we don't think about this when we just get a container of collagen. We're like, oh, I just need a collagen. I'll see if it's grass fed. That's good. Do that. Don't not do that. But also make broth, please.
What does broth mean to you and your family health wise? What do you feel you get from it?
Well, it started for us, like you alluded to this in the budget sense earlier, but it started for us as a great way to get protein and to kind of fill bellies for a decent price, because it's pretty inexpensive. And out here, it really does feel zero waste because, we use the bones, we make the broth. Then I usually cook them again, sometimes up to 3 more times, just getting a weaker and weaker broth, which I'll use for different things, either, mixing up animal food for the critters outside, or cooking noodles in like a watery broth. Yeah. And the spent bones our dogs eat. They just crush them completely. Like they literally eat them. So there's nothing left when we're done with an animal. And it really does feel zero waste. And then we can also give bones. We give bones to the birds as well, and they peck at them and get any last little scrap they can out of them. So, so they get totally used up. And everybody gets, what they need and what they want out of it. My husband always told the kids that broth makes them really strong and really fast. So they would drink a cup of broth and then they'd sprint across the yard. Look how fast I am now. So they ask for it. They're like, can we have some of that to make us fast, please?
For me, I think it feels really comforting. Like, if my tummy feels a bit kind of funny and not sure I want to eat, I will have broth. And in addition to that, the warm kind of fatty depth of flavour with a bit of salt in it's just so comforting. You can see why kind of chicken stock and chicken stock based soup is a kind of that traditional, particularly Jewish kind of idea of, if you're ill, bring some chicken soup, which is obviously made with chicken broth, because it's something that feels medicinal when you're drinking it. Even if you didn't know what the components were in it, it has that kind of nourishing feel to it.
Well, and it's important. You alluded back to this, and this would also make sense if you're sick and your digestive system is having a harder time functioning, because now you're also trying to operate other systems on overdrive. But without the complete spectrum of the animal, you don't do as well with the muscle meat. Your body has a harder time digesting it. And I know there's people who say, there's numbers out there like, hey, have muscle meat at least twice a week, organ meat at least once a week, and bone broth at least 5 times a week or something like that. And I always joke in my head to myself when I see Meatless Mondays thing, I say like, Meatless Monday today, it's only offal. Only bone broth
today. Well, exactly. That's a really important point, because you don't necessarily need to have meat every day. Even if you have the money, you don't have to. But having stock included in your diet daily can bring you so many more benefits than just muscle meat can on its own at about 1/10 of the price.
Yeah. And when they say nose to tail eating, if you have an entire animal in your freezer and you cycle through all the parts of that animal, you'll get the good proportion that you need. You'll get a good muscle amount. You'll get a lot of bone broth. You'll get, the more muscle meat you have, the more offal you have, because the organs proportionately grow. And so everything kind of balances itself out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a scientific statement right there. That's just what I've
rhythms
observed.
that you've experienced. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think we've started talking a little bit about the practicalities. Before we dive into, how you can prepare and how we prepare. I wanted to try to clarify, if we can, what difference there is, if there's any difference between bone broth and meat stock, because I know that confuses quite a few people who come to ancestral eating, because some people call broth, some people call it stock, some people say meat stock. What's your understanding of the difference between broth and stock, and including or not including the words bone and meat?
Well, I have asked a number of professional chefs their opinion just to see what they'll say. And usually the answer I get the most often is you're splitting hairs. And I wish that I had asked Aaron before we got on this, but we'll see what he says. If his culinary school gave him a definition. I've looked it up many times, and my understanding, and Joe Witten on Quirky Cooking gives a really good definition in one of her episodes. I will see if I can find the number and put it in the show notes, but she actually defines each one. And meat stock is lots of meat, some bones. Bone broth is just bones, a little meat, maybe, and some marrow, possibly.
Yeah.
I feel like she said a third one, but I can't remember what it was.
See, that's what's, I think it's the Italian tradition that's slightly confusing me, because brodo is broth in Italian, and generally it's made by boiling the meat and the bones together, and then you use the broth to have your first course with. So you maybe make some tortellini and cook it in the broth. Delicious. And then you serve the meat for secondi, for the main course with vegetables. And so I think the fact that brodo sounds like broth because it starts with BR kind of confused me, because usually we say bone broth. So I think, like you said, splitting hairs really. But I think the main difference that when I came to realise there was a difference was when we did the GAPS diet, the gut and psychology syndrome diet, because at the beginning of that healing, as part of that diet, Natasha Campbell McBride suggests using meat stock, not bone broth, because it's gentler. And so I think that's really where I first thought, okay, there actually is a chemical, difference in the composition, whether you put mostly meat in there or whether you put bones in there. So
and that may be a definition that we've had to create in our modern times, since we are healing our gut lining, which is less common of a thing to have had to do in years past. Not saying that everybody had a healthy gut, just saying that they probably weren't trying to heal it. And I think Joe does say on her episode that meat stock is cooked for a pretty short time, whereas bone broth, to really truly qualify, would have to be over 6 hours or something like that. And and I am just guessing, and I can infer this from chewing the fat, that when people were making broth, they were just throwing in whatever they had on hand and whatever was available. They weren't really parsing between the two.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, so
I usually am, Alison, so I'm just kidding.
Let's talk about the actual practicalities of it. So when we say stock or broth or bone broth, we're talking really about beef, any other kind of cattle, chicken, duck, birds, pork, fish, and of course vegetable. I've made all of those, not some of them not so often. The main stocks that I make now are beef and chicken, but I have made all of them in the past. And all of those, really, any bones, like you said, squirrel, any bones and any meat can make a stock. And I kind of made a list of all the practicalities that I thought we should cover. I'll start with the equipment, because I know perhaps that you use different equipment to me. I don't have an Instapot, so I don't use that. I use my slow cooker for all of my stocks now, but in the past I have used a very large saucepan on the hob. I prefer to use my slow cooker because it can go much lower than I can control that pot on the hob. And I know it's important really to have that water as low as possible for a long time. I remember somewhere, I don't know where, reading that really you should hardly see it bubbling. You shouldn't see
Yeah.
it like a simmer with bubbles coming up all the time. You shouldn't really notice bubbles coming up very often. So my slow cookers vary, and the one that I had prior to this one ran warmer than this one. And that pleases me, this new one, because I can put it down on low and it actually is low. And so I leave my chicken stock or my beef stock in there for a very long time at a very, very low temperature. Do you use your Instapot for stock, or do you do your stock some other way, Andrea?
I don't really use the Instant Pot for stock,
Okay.
although I have before, and you can, I suppose. I couldn't tell you from like you said, a chemical or molecular standpoint if there's benefits or pros or cons to that. I usually do it on the stove, mainly because of power. I used to use the slow cooker for broth, also, like you said, but it takes an awful lot of power. And so I just put it on the stove. In each house, it has changed. And you know how that is, Alison, every time you move and you have to figure out. But I now know which pot and how full, how much meat and how much water or how much bones can sit for how long. And my preferred mode is I have to use my heaviest bottomed kettle on the smallest burner we have on the lowest setting. And if it's got enough bones in it, maybe 3/4 full, and then the water all the way full, I can set it on the back there and turn it on usually when I'm fixing dinner. And then in the morning, when I get up and I make breakfast, I shut it off and it cools. And then sometime, usually after we finish school and lunch, then I strain it. So
that's a nice routine.
That's kind of my routine. It just fits with my day pretty well.
Our one is a bit later than yours, in that usually I put mine on before going to bed, and then I leave it until lunch the next day.
Okay.
And we'll drink it at lunch, and then just after lunch I'll turn it off, and it cools. And then by the time it gets to tea time, like 5 or 6, it's ready to strain, just about cool enough to go in the fridge or freezer by the time we go to bed.
Yeah. So we have the same, probably exact same hours to hours.
Yeah.
I just start mine earlier in the day and take it off earlier.
What do you put in with your bones? Do you have particular things that you like to put in with particular bones? How do you play that?
It's very much based on what I have. I don't usually, for fun, I like to get Sally's book out and try her recipes just because I want to try them all. But most of the time, I would say 85% of the time at least, it's just throwing in what I have. So if I also sort of do stock if I know that, like, say I'm going to chop a whole bunch of carrots and onions and celery and freeze them, then I'm also planning to do a stock because I'll have all those bits to throw in. But I also throw them into a container or a bag and shove it in the freezer too. And then if I'm making stock, sometimes I think, oh yeah, I've got that bag of scraps in there. So sometimes I throw in veggie scraps, herb scraps. If we're harvesting and drying a bunch of herbs, then I throw all the bones. What do you call them? Not bones. From the herbs, like the stems.
The stalks,
I'll throw those in. Sometimes, not always, I do apple cider vinegar and let it sit for half an hour before I cook it.
That helps draw out the minerals.
Yeah.
No, I don't always remember to do that either.
Yeah.
Do you ever roast your bones before you put them in there?
Yeah, I do. I just prefer the flavor myself. So my chicken is usually cooked when I get the bones, because I usually cook it, shred the meat off, and then use the bones.
Okay, so you don't roast those again. You've already roasted the chicken.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No, I don't. Sometimes if I'm feeling snazzy, I'll throw some fat in the pan and toast them in the saucepan before I add the water. Beef, I feel like beef and pork just taste better to me if they were roasted. So I often roast those first. Almost always.
how long do you roast them for, and what kind of temperature?
Oh, whatever.
Just put them in,
Just
and
stick
then
them in
until
a
when you
pretty
remember.
quick oven. So pretty hot, probably between 370 and 425.
Okay.
And until I smell them or think about
Yeah.
it. And
You think of them, then you
so
take them out.
probably, yeah, probably 45 minutes or so.
Okay.
I don't know
Okay. I'm going
actually
to
how
try that,
fast.
because I've never roasted bones before making a stock. But
Oh,
I have
I feel like
heard
it
that,
brings out the umami a little bit more.
yeah, I've heard it's really nice. So I just never get to it. But I shall make a special effort to do that because I want to
Mm.
taste the difference. I might
Well,
find it's, I never go back.
that can go on one of your like make a new kind of broth challenges or
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
Check it out.
So I kind of do similar things to you. I keep scraps, and then just
Okay.
like I pile up bones, I have bags of
Yeah.
bones in the freezer always, and then they come out and get made into stock together. I do that with carrot tops and onions and skins and garlic skins and stems for
Mm-hmm.
parsley, that kind of thing. Sometimes I put a bit of kombu in. That doesn't
Oh.
really affect the flavour, but I've heard that it's really quite good, so I've kind of got used to it. And I really do like, sometimes I put a whole onion in. I never take the skins off because I like the sweetness that the onion imparts
Right.
to the broth. So sometimes
Yeah.
I'll just literally throw a whole onion in.
Do you quarter it? I mean, if
No,
I sometimes throw in a whole onion too, but I'll cut it in half or something. Oh, you don't?
no,
Okay.
I just literally grab it and throw it in. And by
Does
the
it
time it's
come
done,
apart?
it's all... No, it doesn't. No, because the skin holds it together because it's got the skin on it.
What? Okay, I'm totally doing that.
Don't
I'll
need to cut
try
it.
it.
I wanted to. Oh yeah, the thing about the Instapot. Not that I have an Instapot, so I don't know, but I have read.
Mhm.
I said earlier about people who don't like the smell, and apparently you can use the pressure
Mm.
cooker kind of Instapot thing to do bones in, and
So
that means the smell doesn't go through the house. But I've never done it, and I
yeah.
don't know anyone who's done
So
it.
if
So
you were doing that because you didn't like the smell, which is totally fair, um, but I have something to say about that, by the way.
mm,
But if you don't like the smell, then once your Instant Pot is done cooking, you'd either have to wait a pretty long time for it to
yeah,
naturally
cool down.
come down to pressure or
Mm,
step it outside and vent it outside.
yeah,
Otherwise, you're going to get all the smell at once at the end. But also, I will say this might be helpful for somebody who doesn't like the smell.
mm,
I think I may have said this before on here that pork, and we've always bought, you know, farm fresh pastured pork. I have never been able to stand the smell of pork broth cooking, and
mm,
I've never been able to tolerate the taste of it. I would make it because I had the
mm,
bones, but then I
mm,
would hide it in something.
mm.
I didn't like it by itself until I got
Oh, drum
pigs
roll.
from our friends who raised
Mm-hmm.
them without soy. And that's the
Ah,
only thing I can think of is the difference. And I don't even know if they're exclusively without soy or if they sometimes had soy, but they mostly didn't have soy. And as usual, I went to make the broth and I was like, okay, this is going to be gross, but just do it, and I couldn't leave the kitchen. It smelled so good. I was so drawn to
wow.
it. So
And was that with bones or with trotters or
that
what?
was bones. That was just bones,
Okay.
just plain old bones. So I don't know if that was it, but if somebody's really, really bugged by the smell, possibly they could try tweaking what the animals are fed or finding somebody who feeds them no
I
soy
think
just to
we
see.
haven't actually talked about that, have we? But it's, if
No.
possible, organic bones are ideal. Obviously, there are a lot of farmers who can't afford organic certification, so knowing what
Yeah.
the farmer is feeding the animal, because that's going to be part of what makes up its bones, and so the
Yeah.
better feed you can get, and the more natural feed for that animal that you can
Right.
get, the better.
The
So
more time they
that's
can be outside and the more vitamin D and A you'll have in your lard and things like that. And like the animals have to actually be in the sun.
yeah,
So again, I really don't know if that's what it was. And I'm
that's
gonna ask
fascinating.
my friend if we can dig in deeper because I would have thought, oh, the pigs I was already getting were really high quality. So and I
I
know that they were raised
I've
outside. So I
made
don't
pig
know.
stock a fair bit, not in this country, but in England when we used to get trotters all the time. And I didn't really like the smell, frankly, or taste of it. Rob just he's not as I don't know what the word is. I was going to say discerning, but that's not very nice. He's not as fussy. He's not as fussy as me. And so he loved the stock, and he used to eat the bits that were on the, we used to pull the trotters apart and take all the little bones out, the toes or whatever's down there, the metatarsals, and he used to eat all the bits around it. But generally, I used pork stock. I would freeze it in little cubes and then use it in small amounts in other foods because it's very strong. Well, that particular pork stock was strong. And so I found it difficult to drink it on its own. But as a kind of 3 ice cubes in a big stew, it added something without overpowering it. So that's what I'd say about pork.
Maybe it was also the breed of pigs. I'm just sitting here thinking. Maybe it was just the breed was different. I don't know.
Oh, I've been reading a lot of stuff about pigs this week, which is not is going off on too much of a tangent for this episode. But breed of pigs is important, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about fish for a little while, because I used to make fish stock a fair bit when we lived on the coast in Cornwall in England, because I lived on a fishing port, or very near a fishing port. And so there were fishmongers around everywhere, and I could just go in and say, can I have all your bones? And this was when we were doing gaps when we lived there. And so I got lots of non-oily fish skeletons with the head still in too, and then just put them all in and did it in a similar way, but not cooked for quite as long as I would if I'd done beef. And that, again, is a really strong broth, because kind of the fish flavour is, for me, certainly for me, I'm not so used to a fishy broth as I am to a chicken broth. And so tasting it is more of a strange experience, But once I got used to it, and once I learned how to use it in fish soups and in other kind of fishy dishes, it was wonderful. So I think it's easy to kind of be a bit intimidated by fish, but it is very, very simple to go to a fishmonger who will just be throwing away those bones, literally, and get them. We were getting them for nothing, and make a really beautiful fish stock that you can use as a base for fish soups and fish bakes, with mashed potato on the top and fish underneath. So yeah, don't be intimidated by fish stock. That's, I think, the message I want to put across there. Really. Did you make fish broth? I don't know how much fish
not a
you
lot.
eat. I don't know.
Not a lot recently, because we used to. Gary used to fish a lot, and then when we're in Virginia, we would get exactly like you said. People would bring us fish, bones, and Gary did a lot of fishing there too, but not recently. Although I'd like to do it again.
Yeah, so would I. I haven't done it here, but we do have a fish market in Florence, so perhaps at some stage this year I might be able to go there and pick up some bones and bring them back, which would be nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about the type of bones. We talked about, I wanted to talk about head and feet as well. I said the head's quite important for the fish. I think most people know that for chicken, if you can get the head and the feet, it will make your broth much more jellified, if that's what you want. I know a lot of people make stock and like, my stock's all runny, what have I done wrong? Now, sometimes it's just you've put too much water in, but most of the time, the easiest way to gel it is to put feet in. Pig trotters make really, really, really gelatinous broth. And if you can get chicken feet and put them in, that always does the same thing for me. That makes my broth go like jelly, for sure.
Yeah.
It's quite something to look at, a chicken head and chicken feet in a broth.
Yeah, and our dogs love those. We give them to them once we're done cooking, and there's not a bit left. They love them.
Do you boil your broth? Oh yeah, go on.
Well, I don't like to. I mean, sometimes it boils, but I like to keep it low, like you said.
Because some people say boil it, skim off what comes up, and then turn the heat down.
Yeah,
but I don't do that in the slow cooker, obviously. And I wondered whether, because you're using a pot, whether you do that. No, you don't. Okay.
Not really. I mean, sometimes I throw a bunch of pieces in, and then, like I said, like a feather or something. I'm like, so I'll skim a little bit if I feel like it looks like it needs it, or if the foam looks a little dirty or something like that. But not usually. And if somebody is butchering chickens, I'll just sideline here, or any poultry, birds, ducks, whatever. When you are blanching your chicken to pluck it, then do the feet too. And then once you separate the feet, if you separate the feet from the body, you don't have to, but if you do, just peel that skin off and pop off there's like nail covers. I've seen people scrubbing the chicken feet, and I'm just like, what? That sounds like a terrible time and gross. So just skin them. It's easier.
Okay.
And the ones you
that's
see in
a
the
really
store
good
are
tip.
skinned. Like they look all sort of pink and clean, those are skinned.
Ours don't look pink and clean. Ours look kind of brown with a nail on the end.
Well, you might be able to skin them then.
I'd never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another thing
I
for me to
feel
try.
like maybe you get more of the goods that way, but maybe not. I don't know. But I've seen what the chickens walk, and I'm skinning them.
Yeah, no, I know that's a question that people ask. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Next time I get some feet, I'm going to look at them.
I'll take a picture of 2 feet side by side.
Thank you. That would be really cool. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so before we go into how we eat stock and how you can eat and use stock, I wanted to just kind of sidestep briefly into industrial stock, which is stock cubes, stock powder. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I had a shock. About 2 weeks ago, I found a BBC archive of old BBC programmes, go back on the BBC forever, put any search term in and it'll find you all the programmes on that. So
okay, I want that.
Obviously the first one I put in was lard, but after that I put stock in. And I found a BBC food programme from about 10 years ago about stock, and they talked about how the stock cube developed, how this particular person decided to try and bring the beef extract to the masses, and then how it developed into a stock cube. And the presenter went to visit a stock cube factory, and I was just astounded. There was just this chaos of noise in the background, and he was describing these absolutely huge machines that they take the stock and then make it into a dusty extract, a powder, and then they spray this dusty extract in these massive vats, and they vaporize water at it to make it stick together, and then there's machines that form it into little cubes, and I was just like, what on earth have we done to this? It's just, you have your animal, and you respect your animal, and you use everything, and you use the bones to make stock in your kitchen, and you nourish your family with it. And there's all this machines whirring powder at however many miles an hour and spraying water at them in order to make cubes. It just seemed absolutely bonkers to me. And
no wonder people are intimidated to make broth. They're like, I don't have a centrifuge in my house. Like, oh no.
Why do you have to spray water at something while some powder rotates around in a massive machine? I just put some bones in a pan. And I think that, industrial stock is not anywhere anything like the stock that we've been talking about making, and historically the stock that has been made by cultures for many, many centuries. And
would you like to know what's in it?
You're going to tell me, aren't you? Go on.
Yes, I am. Okay. Again, taken from Sally Fallon's book, Nourishing Broths. Weiler's chicken-flavored bouillon cubes. They contain no dried bone stock at all. Here's the ingredients list. Plug your ears, Alison. Okay. Salt, sugar, mechanically separated cooked ground chicken meat, sodium bicarbonate, monosodium glutamate, hydrolyzed corn gluten, corn maltodextrin, onion powder, chicken fat, hydrolyzed corn gluten protein, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, and partially hydrogenated cottonseed oil, autolyzed yeast extract, water, garlic powder, disodium inosinate, disodium guanylate, dextrose, cooked chicken powder, natural chicken flavor, hydrolyzed soy protein, calcium silicate, gelatin, soy lecithin, natural flavor, turmeric, corn syrup, solids, spice, modified cornstarch, silicon dioxide, diacetyl flavor, artificial flavor, tricalcium phosphate, alpha tocopherols antioxidant, corn oil, BHA preservative, propyl gallate, citric acid, BHT preservative.
Gosh.
Hmm.
Have you finished?
There you go.
I wasn't
That's
sure
it.
whether we'd have to like do 2 episodes to keep
Episode
you
2
going.
to complete the list.
Oh my gosh. And that is a food, apparently.
No, but it's sold and people eat it.
Oh my gosh.
Soylent Green. Soylent chicken.
So
That's just
how
crazy to
far
me.
is that from the
I don't
beautiful,
know.
nourishing drink that you just talked about and all of the health properties in it and the love
Well,
of that
think
quote that we
about
first started talking?
you're sick, Alison. Let's say you're sick, and you know that somehow we still have the awareness that broth and chicken broth is what you get when you're sick. I don't know why we even still know that. And this is what somebody makes for you.
Yeah.
Like inflammation in a kettle.
Yeah. It's
just crazy. And that has been a part of the process of, you know, simultaneously removing people from the kitchen, from the home, and, increasing profits of something somewhere, that like for whatever reason, Alison, they determined that spraying powder out of the air was more profitable than boiling bones. And that list I just gave you didn't even encompass the toxic sludge that the little bit of chicken that was in there went through to be processed. None of those ingredients even showed up on this list, but they very definitely show up in the finished product of the chicken, as well as the feed that the chickens get during their short lifetime.
Gosh, and it's just like a microcosm of what's happened to so many foodstuffs, isn't it? I mean, you compare it to bread. If you went and read an ingredient list of a bread in a plastic packet in a supermarket, and think about the process that they use to whip up the bread and put air bubbles in it. It's just, it's not food. It's just not food.
And I'm thinking about also with the chicken that they used in there. Like I just keep going backwards in my mind. What else? What else? And I'm thinking, of course, they're industrial chickens, which grow very, very fast. And you and I both know, Alison, and maybe this was part of why I liked that pork broth for my friends, because their pigs live a lot longer than most pigs that are like twice as long as most pigs that are raised. And I know with heritage chicken, the reason why a heritage chicken like has to go, 16 to 18 weeks to be mature, to be classified as heritage is partly because they build a much better nutritional network in their body, their organs, and their collagen and their bones are better.
Yeah.
Because they built more slowly.
That makes sense.
So crazy.
Yeah, you can go back endlessly in each of those, can't you? Each of the ingredients. It's bonkers. Anyway, let's go back to the good stuff and talk about...
That's enough about that.
Let's talk about how we can use proper stock and how both of us use proper stock in our houses. So the first one is just to drink it. I mean, we drink stock on its own and with meals. Like you said, it's really good to drink it with... when you're eating muscle meat, because it provides extra things that the muscle meats don't provide and helps you digest
you need those
it.
aminos.
Yeah, exactly. And I like to drink it on its own, sometimes as a snack, sometimes just instead of supper if I'm not really that hungry and I've eaten quite a lot that day. I love to drink it on its own with perhaps a pinch of salt. Sometimes we had Stephanie on the Patreon feed talking about herbalism, and then we're coming up with another episode from a lady in South Africa who also does a lot with herbs. And a lot of them use herbs in their broth. So I think that's something that if you're drinking it, you can add to the medicinal benefits of the stock by putting in herbs that have additional benefits, and that will flavour them as well. I think Ira said she puts them in when she first starts her stock, but you could also just put your stock on the stove and warm it up with additional herbs in, which would be
That's what I do.
just as nice. Yeah, exactly.
Just because I tend to make a big batch and leave it pretty neutral, and because then with each day you
can make it something
otherwise
different.
I get sick of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I use mine, as I said, to cook millet in, to cook sorghum in, to cook other grains that we use. I use it for soups. I use it for stews. Sometimes if I'm making a stew with meat that's got a bone in it, I'll just put water in my stew because there's bones already in that meat. But if I'm doing a meat that's like a diced beef or something that doesn't have bones in it, I will often use half stock, half water, sometimes even all stock in those stews. I explained how Italians use it earlier on, which is they cook up the meat and the bones together, and then they use that stock to cook pasta in, and then they use the meat to eat separately. I've never actually done it like that, but I hope to sometime. And the other thing, which I don't do quite so much, but I know you do, is making gravy. And I know restaurants do that. Obviously, they make a reduction of the stock. And there's two methods. You can reduce it and make a reduction, or you can add flour. I don't do that very often. Maybe you could talk about how you make gravy with your stock, Andrea, because I know you do that more than I do.
Yeah. So just put a little fat in the pan. I mean, I don't know measurements because I don't know how much you want to make or how big your pan is, but put some fat in the pan, and then you can sprinkle in whatever flour you want. It could be einkorn or wheat, or I guess just about any flour. Gluten-free flours work too. And whisk it, toast it, just kind of get it nice and brown. And then as I'm whisking it on, a medium heat or so, then I just start pouring in broth slowly and whisking it in and it just thickens up, and you can pour in some cream or milk or tomato sauce, or you can really do whatever you want at this point and just make it into a thick sauce. You can mix in cheese or cream cheese or sour cream, or and usually I put in some salt. You can put in herbs or essential oils or herbed salt. And then you can often will mix in minced meat.
Oh yeah.
So or shredded meat, and you can serve that over rice or pasta, or just by itself, or cooked greens or whatever, or with some bread on the side and dip it all up. Or you can just make a thick gravy, and then sometimes I'll make a thick gravy if I've got a big kettle of soup on the stove and kind of turn it into a stew, make it more chunky and thick. And
you're reminding me of a recipe that I wrote up on my site last year, which is a sourdough discard soup, which is cooking up lots of veg and then putting the stock in, and then having some sourdough discard and literally tempering it slowly with a bit of stock so it doesn't go split, and then you don't have pouring it in. So it's a similar thing.
Yeah, and you could use sourdough discard to make gravy.
Yeah.
What are those noodles called? The German noodles? I always forget the name. I don't know why. But you make your batter and then you pour it in a colander with big holes over your soup. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. No, I've seen Kobo Fermentary do them on Instagram.
But I wonder if you could do that. I guess you could do that with your sourdough discard.
Yeah, no, that would work, I think. So you also drink the broth slightly differently. I've heard you saying you've put coconut oil in it, and you poach eggs in it sometimes. Talk about other ways that you use broth.
Okay. Well, I like having broth in the morning because it's just a really easy, fast breakfast. And that was one thing that I was finding. One of my sticking spots in the day was I wasn't getting breakfast soon enough because I couldn't get it together.
Yeah.
I couldn't get it together quick enough. Once I eat, then I actually start everybody else's breakfast because they're usually still asleep. So I'll just heat up like a a pint or a quart or whatever. Sometimes I heat up a quart and then have it at lunch too. And I add salt. And then sometimes, when it's hot, I'll crack a couple eggs into a small bowl, and then I lower it really close to the broth and slip the eggs in, and they stay together really nice that way. Don't do the whole spinny thing.
Yeah, we talked about that on another podcast, didn't we?
Yeah. I still can't wrap my head around it. Sometimes I'll mix in some rice noodles if I have them. Don't usually have them, but if I do, you can just put in like a couple rice noodles and they cook just even after the stove is off. They just kind of melt really quick. I don't know. I just usually open the fridge and I see what I have. I throw all kinds of things in. Sometimes I put in like chunks of cheese rind or sauerkraut, jalapenos. Just trying to think what I usually have sitting in the fridge. It's just based on whatever I have. So I might start at thinking I'm just going to have broth and salt. And then I'm like, oh, I'll throw this in. And then by the time I'm done, I put in 6 different things.
Yeah, and you've got a wonderful inventive soup.
Yeah, it's just whatever strikes the fancy.
Let's talk a bit about freezing, because I know we talked about freezing on Patron podcast, one of the kitchen table chats, but you had a lot to share that was really useful for me. So briefly before we finish, let's talk about how you freeze your stock, because it's really beneficial to hear your experience.
Okay. So I usually let it cool down on the stove before I strain it, so it's not boiling hot, but it's not cold. It's just warm. If it's too cold, you can't strain it. And then once I strain it, I like to move it to the fridge and chill it, and then move it to the freezer and freeze it. And it is important the containers you use. I get probably almost every day somebody says that they broke a jar freezing in it. So I will link to my post on Instagram about freezing in jars. And the important thing is, as I think I said in our recording before, not just the shoulder of the jar, because people will say overfilled it, but not just the shoulder of the jar, but the heel of the jar and the curve on the bottom and the inside of the jar as well. And those are too pronounced in most, not all, but most quart-sized jars. And so you can't freeze in those typically. There are brands. Kilner is one that have a straight heel and no shoulder at the top, and you can freeze in those. So
that's what's
if
important.
you are, if you're in the US and you're freezing in mason jars, the wide mouth pint is great. The wide mouth, which is the only opening they have for this size of jar, 1.5 pints is great for freezing in. None of the quarts are acceptable for freezing in the Mason brand, or Ball brand, I should say. And then they have smaller sizes too, but what's the point in freezing 4 ounces of broth?
Do you fill your broth up to the top of the jar?
No,
How
I
far?
don't. So I used to fill the jars. There actually is on most Ball jars, there's actually a freeze line marked.
Okay.
Not all of them have it. Depends on what year they're manufactured, but I fill them. I leave just the same headspace as I usually do in canning, like 1.5 inches. And then I used to set them in the freezer and let them freeze solid and then put a cap on them the next day. But now I'm confident enough in how full I can fill them that I just put the cap on, label it, and freeze them.
Okay. And how long do you keep them for in the freezer?
Oh, it depends. Usually not very long. I would say that, with most frozen foods, the nutritional quality starts to degrade at about 6 months. But safety wise, it's still fine for probably, I guess, a long time. But it does start to degrade after a while. So,
I don't think we've ever kept any longer than 6 months. Just
usually
because we use it.
Usually, if I'm freezing it, it's so that I have pints or smaller containers on hand that I can give to a mom when she has a baby, because we tend to go through it pretty quickly, that it doesn't usually even make it to the freezer. So
I don't often put mine in the freezer. We've got 3 jars in the fridge at the moment, litre, and I will use those within the next week, probably.
Yeah.
Do you skim your fat before you freeze? You said you freeze your fat separately. So I'm assuming you take it off before you freeze it.
Yeah, sometimes I do, if there's a lot. And that's an advantage to chilling it in the fridge because the fat will separate to the top and you can just pick that off in like a chunk, get a fork and you can just scoop it all off.
So I use that fat for everything. I know some people don't particularly like to, but for every type of stock that I make, I use the fat, all of it.
Yeah.
I never throw it away.
We just put it, I have a jar in the fridge that I just keep adding to. And then that's what turns into mayo, or like if I'm making gravy, that's what goes in the pan usually. Yeah. So it gets used up pretty quick.
Wonderful. Okay. Have we covered it all, do you think?
No, but we've covered a lot.
Is there anything else you want to add?
I'll throw out that last little detail, and you can read more about this in Sally Fallon's book, or just go online. You can probably find a lot too, that your bone broth is the best sports recovery and protein drink that you'll find out there, because it's got all those components that you need, that you would pay so much money to have added into a powdered drink. And remember, a lot of sports injuries wouldn't have happened if we'd had good collagen, good bone structure, and good movement. So, of course, check out Katie Bowman's books. You know, Alison, you already mentioned that you read all of those, and I'm reading them now. But those go hand in hand with your ancestral foods. So get the protein. Completely. If you have kids in sports and things like that, of course, you know, kids anyways, I think should be drinking it, but definitely rather than giving them some kind of a weird supplement, give them bone broth.
Yeah, and do something different with your bone broth. If you've just, been using it for stocks or soups, then try drinking it, add some herbs to it, use it to make gravy, do something different, because it's such a versatile and economical food. It just...
Make it for breakfast.
It really needs, it needs to be the heart of people's kitchen. It's a simple thing, and it's so delicious.
So delicious. Yeah, and cook if you have just feet and heads from chickens, that's what I've been doing for a really flavorless-ish broth. It's not totally flavorless, but if you want to make like hot chocolate or pudding or something like that, you can use that.
Wow, that's a very different way of using it. That sent me off thinking about other things now. Thank you. Hot chocolate broth.
Yeah. Well, Alison,
I'm going to go and make one.
Yes, you are. Okay, well then, let's call this a wrap. And thanks to our patrons who bring this show to you all every week. Thank you so much, you guys, for supporting us. It means a lot.
Yeah, and all the details will be in our show notes of everything we've talked about, and also of our Patreon feed if you are interested in joining us. Thank you ever so much, Andrea. That was a wonderful episode.
Alison.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth, and Alison's at Ancestral_Kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.